Day one of the 3-day workshop. We had the morning session, excellent morning session, and now we are moving to the next session, which is training. And the training will be provided by excellent experts, Keiichi Tamaki. He is Chief Technical Officer of D-Sharing based in Japan, and he is my former colleague. He used to work at Asian Development Bank previously, mainly on projects in urban water supply, transport, tourism projects in South Asia. And Naoki Sakai, he is CEO of Japan Nudge Promotion Council and also in management of D-Sharing based in Japan. He was also my former colleague, senior energy at Asian Development Bank previous years. Okay, so Tamaki-san and Sakai-san, thank you so much for offering this wonderful training using Japanese data, which is in open free access. I'm looking forward to learn from you. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Okay. My name is Naoki Sakai, and I am CEO of this Japan Nudge Promotion Council, and Tamaki-san is my colleague. And thank you. I worked now with Government of Japan, Ministry of Environment, taking the nudge theory and promoting the Japanese consumer to enhance the energy efficiency and utilize the renewable energy. And as introduced, I worked from 2000 to 2016 at the ADB as energy specialist and climate change specialist and public-private sector specialist. And particularly, I worked with Government of India at that time to introduce the large-scale solar park model. And we mobilized the concessional fund, which is called Clean Technology Fund. And at the COP, where the Paris Declaration was set out. And thank you. We learned also very much at this morning session. And it is crystal clear that we need to replace the fossil power plant at some time with renewable energy. And the timing could be argued. However, please let me talk a little bit another aspect, because, okay, let me raise the argument taking a little bit different approach, which is we call the time slicing methodology. And Tamaki-san, please go to the next slide. And our approach is quite simple. So particularly in Japan, and I believe more or less in the other countries, we heavily depend on the solar power as renewable energy sources. As the result, this graphic shows the daytime solar power generations percentage proportion is quite high. So in some sense, we already achieved at daytime the 100% renewable energy, zero emission grid. But nighttime, because of our over dependence on the solar power, there is no solar in night. So fossil power proportion is quite high. In the other words, the hourly CO2 emission factor, which is how much CO2 is emitted to generate 1 kilowatt-hour electricity at that time, that is hourly CO2 emission factor, is quite different. In daytime, it's 0.3, 0.2, but at nighttime, it's a little bit better figure. But in Tokyo metropolitan area, where nuclear power plant is not operated and renewable energy power generation is quite limited. So it could be 0.8 kilogram per kilowatt hours. So noting that, we should consider in more technical and quantitative manner to solve this nighttime high emission factor problem. And there are basically two methodologies or two solutions. Number one is supply side solutions. So we can shift the renewable energy power using battery storage, or in the morning, it is also discussed that maybe we can utilize the electricity vehicle as a storage. So people can charge the power at daytime, then discharge the power at nighttime. So that kind of time shift approach could be utilized. And another one, of course, Japan also would like now considering to introduce more wind power and biomass power plant together with pumping storage power plant. So that is a supply side solution. And the second one is the demand side solution. So we directly intervene the consumers to shift the time of their power usage. For example, we ask the consumer the usage of the washing machine at nighttime from nighttime to daytime using the behavioral insight, some methodologies. So this is the demand side solutions. And now please let me add one more solution. It's third methodology. Suppose that the newly developed, with advanced technology, the fossil power plant emission factor is, let's say, 0.3 kilogram per kilowatt hours. And please suppose at that nighttime, the grid average emission factor is 0.8. Then even by introducing the lower, the still CO2 emission, but lower, relatively lower emission factors per plant, we can reduce the average of the nighttime CO2 emission factor. So 0.3 is much higher, maybe than at the average of daytime CO2 emission factor. We can still reduce the total CO2 emission factor. So this is the economic value of the relatively low coal, low CO2 emission fossil power plant. So in other words, we can compare the economic value of the different types of fossil power plant with different CO2 emission factor. So this kind of methodology could be combined together to achieve this, to fill the gap between night and daytime. And now, Tamaki-san, my colleague, will explain about that in detail. But the good news is that in Japan, we can access to the big data related to this. And we hope that we can work together with the researchers and the policymakers in DMCs to solve this issue, hopefully using this big data. Thank you. So Tamaki-san, please continue.
Okay, thanks, Sakai-san. I work with Sakai-san for Japan Energy Promotion Council. And we are basically assisting the Japanese Ministry of Environment. And the focus is this energy transition, but we look into behavioral economics, like a nudge theory, which was advocated by Professor Richard Thaler, who was 2017 Nobel Prize winner. And that in particular, we are interested in nudge theory, which we talk about a little bit later. and that energy sector, particularly mainstreaming renewable energy, enhanced energy efficiency, and use of EVs. And by the way, I'm not neither economist or power sector specialist, but just urban planner. So please don't expect the perfect answer to your question. And that this presentation is not meant to present any particular findings, although we talk about a bit of observation and anecdotes. And instead, we would like to stimulate the brilliant thinker like you, the audience, to do more analytical works and provoke policy debates and help formulate reasonable alternative policies. So let me start the presentation. Japan is a statistical paradise. That is what we think Japan is. And that let me show you the relevant data stored in various websites. The first, that is Organization for Cross-Regional Coordination of Transmission Operators. The acronym is OCT. And that is this. This is their website. And this is English. And they are basically coordinator for 10 regional grid. And that they have a Japanese website, which is which has more links to each and every regional grid. And that Japan has basically 10 regions, and that 9 of which are interlinked. And that as you can see, there are Hokkaido, Tohoku, Tokyo, Chubu, Hokuriku, Kansai, Chugoku, Shikoku, Kyushu, and Okinawa. So except for Okinawa, 9 are for the 4 main islands of Japan and interlinked. And that another data provided by, I'm sorry, I have to go back. Yeah, so among the 9 interconnected regions, we particularly focus on Kyushu, that is Kyuden, Kyushu and Denryoku. Denryoku is a power supply. So we abbreviated Kyuden, Kanden, Toden. That's regions we normally call in Japan. And that Kyuden, when you jump to Kyuden website, they have downloadable data for hourly supply and so on. And another thing which you can find on the publicly available website is Japan Electric Power Supply Power Exchange, JEPX. And that is basically market data. And that they have a system price and regional price. And that, again, hourly data is available throughout the year. And market price, when you jump to Japanese website, there are links to download the CSV files for the data for the entire year. And another data, which is the Japan Meteorological Agency of weather. And this is their website. And that this from this site, you should be able to obtain the weather data, like sunshine, when was sunny day, when was a rainy day, and so on, by hour. So by using all these data, let me start by Octo data. And this is a format of Octo data. And it will give you the area demand, such as entire Kyushu area demand. And it is broken down into different power source generation method. That is nuclear, thermal, hydro, geothermal, biomass, and solar and wind. By the way, you should pay attention to this utilized and suppressed. And that in particular in Kyushu region, where solar installation capacity is rather large, and that sometimes it exceeds the demand. So they have to suppress the input. And that's why this data utilized and suppressed are shown. And that's also for wind. And also there are pumping up hydro that is utilizing excess power generated to pump up water to the upper dam for storage. And the last column is linked to another region that is also quite relevant for market integration. And from this data, you should be able to model the emission per kilowatt hour for each region. And the assumption we use is 800 gram CO2 per kilowatt hour for thermal and 0 for renewables. And unfortunately, breakdown of thermal, such as coal, oil, LNG combined, is not available on this database. And next, this is JPX data. That is a price of the spot market and area by area. And that this is also available for each 30 minutes throughout the year. And that sell bid, buy bid, and sold, and the area price all shown. And this is something we found in the paper 9 that is talking about interconnection, which is, I think, a subject talked about tomorrow. And CO2 emission, decarbonizing transition from fossil fuel-fired thermal, such as coal, oil, LNG combined, to renewable. That is an ongoing trend, what we will have to follow. And this grid supply is, you don't know where it comes from. So it's analogous to this concept of hydrogen, which is how hydrogen is produced, copied from International Renewable Energy Agency. So gray hydrogen, that is very dirty, and blue hydrogen, slightly better with carbon capture. Turquoise hydrogen, which is even better, and then green hydrogen, which is very clean, but at the moment, not yet very available. So this is analogous to this concept of hydrogen production. And clean and dirty electricity get mixed up when fed into grid. That is what I just said. But you can tell weighted average CO2 emission per kilowatt hour. That is just, Sakai-san showed upfront. So we look at the Kyushu electric power, Kyushu Denryoku, abbreviated Kyuden. That is a southern main island of Japan. And that is the frontier of Japan's decarbonizing electricity generation transition. But because it's south, sunshine is better than other parts of Japan. So that is what we see this. But this is April 2021 working day. And that's a weighted average CO2 emission per kilowatt hour. So during the nighttime, there's no sun. And the power is basically from thermal plant. So it's rather high, but when sun rises, the average goes down quite dramatically. And then when sun sets, back up again. So this is working day scenario, well, working day actual data. And then this is now non-working day, Saturday, Sunday, and holiday. It's more or less the same, although that I think it's slightly lower compared with working day. And CO2 emission continued. So balancing demand and supply, that is what electricity is all about. The same amount need to be provided at the same time. And when you have a mixture of thermal and renewable, you have to think about the dispatching order of generating units under deregulated market. That is a tricky part. And when you do this, then there's a difficulty to recover capital cost of rarely dispatched, which is relatively more expensive generating units. I mean, solar and wind are now cheaper and relative to thermal plant, but they are intermittent. So when you have a surge in the demand, you will have to augment the supply. And in order to do that, you have to have a controllable power plant, which is mostly thermal and relatively more expensive. So what do you do? I mean, how to recover capital costs for such generation plant? And also you will have to think about efficiency and supply side efficiency. And that, as I said, excess power is usually used for pump up hydro or storage battery. But there is about 30% loss. When you store 100%, well, 100 kilowatt hour, you can get only 70 kilowatt hour of output after storing it. So it is better to use the power as it is generated rather than store it and use it later. Okay, and well, this is the price side data from JPX, and that area price of working day, April 2021. And that, as you can see, there are surge around the time people go home and start well, cooking watching TV, doing laundry. So there's a surge during the evening time. And that's the same thing, slightly less pronounced for non-working day, Saturday, Sunday, and holidays. And this is a scattergram of area price and the weighted average CO2 emission. Well, as you can expect, the area price is become basically near zero for basically during the solar power is full operation. And changing to demand side, and that's a demand management, which this nudge theory is quite relevant. And that first of all, this peak shifting to avoid investing in additional power plant or generating unit, that is area, thrust of this demand management. You don't want to invest in the new power plant. So you want to suppress the surge whenever it comes. So how to do that? And that the good news is IoT, Internet of Things, smart meters are now replacing old dumb meters at each customer. And that's not only large industrial and commercial customers, but also small household customers. Like, my house, it's already smart meter equipped. And then the question comes, we used to have a rigid time-based pricing, time of use tariff. And it used to be encouraging customers to use excess electricity during night time. And does it still make sense? And that we doubt, this is a good, idea anymore. And that how to do that? That is a nudge comes in, nudging demand shift. And that's a data-driven demand management. And that what typically done, that's mostly US story, American story. And that peak time energy saving rewards, bill credit or rebate. And that's how many American utilities are already doing for a number of years. And that there are two ways, manual and automatic. And automatic means by using IoT thermostat, such as Nest that I show you after this. And this is basically nudge theory to encourage customers to save electricity during peak time and use excess cleaner electricity. That is what many American utilities are already doing. And by the way, Japan's Kyuden, Kyushu Power Utility, is also offer the discounted rate for excess cleaner electricity during daytime for Tokyo Steel, which used to use a significant amount of electricity for electric furnace during nighttime. But they realize that doesn't make sense because excess power is not these days during the nighttime, but the daytime. So now Kyuden and Tokyo Steel got agreement to use the excess power from mainly solar during the daytime. So they basically changed the starting shift to do more work during the daytime instead of nighttime. And again, this efficiency issue comes up, and the household storage battery, such as this Tesla Powerwall, is great, and you should do that anyway. But it's still better to use the power as it is generated, which means basically, do the laundry during the daytime, do the dryer operation during the daytime, and so on. And to show you how it looks, thermostat, old and new. Well, it's a circular shaped, very similar, but it's fundamentally very different. The old one is just set the temperature and leave it. But the new one, well, this is Nest, and that this became very popular in US. But this is not the only model. There are many other competitors making the similar product in US. And that you can use basically any type, and you can get the debates, from any way, by using any device you install. By the way, this is rather easy in US because in the US house, it's basically centrally air conditioned. Like a small house, 1 unit outside, backyard, and a bigger house, maybe 2 or 3. And that it is controlled by this device, thermostat. And there's no fancy functions like blowing direction and those things. And that we are actually doing similar trial testing in Japan. They already have an Econet light that is a standard for Japanese household appliance to connect to internet. And unfortunately, we are finding out it's rather difficult to connect and utilize this device through this Econet light standards. And how things work in US. Well, this is one example of Baltimore Gas and Electricity Company, which is offering 2 different ways to save. One is a hands-on way, and another one is an automatic way. And that either way, you get the rebate, subsidy on your next bill. And hands-on is basically you manage the usage of the high capacity appliance during the peak time. And normally you get the notice on SMS or email that in 1 day in advance. The next day, there's a very high temperature expected. And from such like 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., if you don't use electricity, you get the rebate. Less than, like 1 week earlier average. That is how they calculate if you save power usage. And that's a hands-on manual way. And another way is an automatic way. That is what this right-hand side Nest device can do. When you have signed up, automatic, power suppression mode, utility will send signal just before this peak time, so that the air conditioner starts operating ahead of this very high temperature time, and then slow down during the high temperature time, so that this peak is avoided, peak is suppressed. That's the automatic way. So either way, you can get rebate. And this is how things are elaborated either way. And that's more or less what I have to say. And yeah, we are welcome to answer any question you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamaki-san. Please let me summarize. So we need to consider about night and daytime gap. And to analyze that, as well as to consider solutions or even evaluate the economic value, we can use the hourly emission CO2 factors, which is, I believe, getting a little bit popular since last year. So some researchers already set out some research papers. And we should, and in Japan, we can use many open data source. And we should consider both demand and the supply side. And supply side, of course, we should consider the demand storage or time shift materials, as well as we can consider the relatively lower CO2 emission fossil power plant. And on the demand side, of course, it's important to consider the industrial energy efficiency or time shift. However, on top of that, we also consider the consumer's behavioral change. And the United States, like a Google Nest, is quite a promising tool to make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Takami-san and Sakai-san. Excellent, impressive data you got from Japan, and analysis you can do using this data. So I was actually thinking, like, how can I apply this knowledge I learned from you today for developing Asia, right? Because, you know, like our main focus for ADBI, main focus is developing member countries of ADB, right? So for in developing Asia, I know this like price different, lower at night, more expensive at day, or vice versa. Popular in developed countries, high income countries like Japan, maybe UK, and maybe US you showed. But for example, in my home country, we don't have this different price, the price depending on the day or night. It's the same, flat, right? I think I lived in Singapore also, I think it was flat. So I wonder why other developing Asian countries, why don't they do this? They like different price according to time. Is it because they don't have a need in that, or because it's very difficult to implement? Do you know?
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great point. And so, yeah, I agree that every country have every different energy portfolio, and maybe it's not so considerable, this kind of the time gap. But having said that, each countries have, okay, because of the intermittent nature of renewable energy, and because like Indonesia, they have a geothermal, in the, maybe in China, PRC also, the wind farm, wind power generation in the ocean is also quite popular. So every country has a different portfolio. Having said that, because of the intermittent nature, somehow this kind of timely, I mean, time slice analysis is quite important. And the availability of the data, yes, maybe in DMCs, it's quite difficult to get this kind of open source, low-hanging fruit data. However, making some kind of research or some pilot survey more or less we can get some data and we can do some analysis. Am I answering your question?
Thank you very much, Sakai-san. Yeah, do you know why utilities in developing Asia, why don't they set up different price for different time, like you showed?
Well, let me say something. I think it doesn't make sense anymore to use the time of use tariff, which is cheaper during the night time. That doesn't make sense anymore. But instead, it's better to use data, actual data. And particularly the weather forecast is getting better, these days. So it's a good idea to notify the users ahead of time, like 1 day ahead, and that tomorrow from time 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. there's a surge expected, and that this rebate is available for you. If you you don't use as much power as you did for the last a week. So I think this data-driven demand management is a logical way to do different tariff scheme rather than rigid time of use tariff.
Okay, Tamaki-san, please let me supplement your statement. And I believe that because of the IoT or advanced technology, now the enabling environment, we can make it even in DMCs. And on the assumption that there would be some market or some signal to identify the cost of each time frame. And please do not mix the price of, demand supply of the power itself and the demand supply of the renewable energy, CO2 emission reduction value. So there are two different markets should be created. And in the United States, in Europe, there is clearly market. But in the world, even in Japan, there is no country that create real-time CO2 emission value or offset certificate exchange market. So my answer is that maybe using some new technology to identify and to measure the demand and supply and measure the supply by hour, supply by the energy sources, then we can create this kind of time-based electricity tariff with more cost-efficient, effective manner. Thank you.
Yeah, I think data collection is important. First of all, the government should think about continuously obtain data, demand supply data of electricity, and perhaps make it available, publicly available to researchers, like yourself.
Sorry, and again, please repeat my point. Again, it's relatively easy to consider about the economic value of the electricity itself because there is market. However, it's quite different to identify and evaluate the on top of that CO2 emission reduction value, which means the renewable energy power generation value itself. Thank you.
Many thanks for excellent explanation. And you highlighted that it's important for utilities and government to provide data in free access. So I wonder, because in my country, I don't have such data access, even my own country. So why do you think in Japan, utilities with companies putting data in open access, is it government requirement or they just do it by themselves without any requirements?
Okay, thank you. It's a good question. And to be honest, I'm not a government official, so I can say my honest view. Japan is a little bit behind of the United States and the EU where this kind of the power exchange and the data disclosure is quite advanced compared with Japan. However, Japan is now trying to catch up with these countries by providing this kind of data. Actually, in fact, it's quite fresh. I mean, each power utility is now pushed or obliged by government, policymakers and the regulator to set out that kind of 6 years hourly data by energy sources. So it's quite strong commitment of policymakers, METI, Ministry of Energy and Trade Industry. Thank you.
Great, many thanks. So I think this data, putting data, having this so much data for government to have it, it's even more important as we get more and more renewable, right? So maybe before it was the fossil fuel-based electricity, maybe its importance was not so high, but I understand now as countries going more towards net zero carbon emissions, so they need to more focus on data, right? Thank you very much. So can we go to open Q&A box? I see you started to answer questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, would you like to take the first question from Jaspal? If you understood it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is dispatching order. I think it, in the deregulated electricity market, you have to pick the lowest price, power plant, and then second lowest, third lowest, and that's what basically market mechanism applies.
Okay. Okay. Please let me supplement Tamaki-san's statement. Unfortunately, I do not have an exact number, but Japan is a relatively high electricity rate, and Japan is some kind of very matured economy, so we cannot expect the big growth of the power demand itself. Maybe I would say average 3% per year, the power demand growth. So it compared with DMCs, it's relatively managed. But having said that, we should consider not only today, but also this kind of a curve by 5 years ago, 5 years after, 10 years after. So that again, we can make some model to analyze the long-term future economic value of each renewable energy power plant as well as fossil power plant. Thank you.
Many thanks. There is another question from Jaspal, but since we are not familiar with Indian case, let me rephrase it still. I still think it's a very interesting question. So this is the same concern, I think, for my country, for any low-income developing countries or middle low-income countries. You pointed nicely, Tamaki-san, you said this how you call it, peak time tariff, right? And you said, oh, government can announce tomorrow at this time we'll have low price like that, so please consume it, or if you can refuse to consume it, right? So it's nice on one hand, but on another hand, because we want for countries to have just transition, right? We don't want especially low-income groups, vulnerable groups to receive crazy bills because of these fluctuations. For example, they missed it, communication with government, and it's not perfect, right? And data exchange and all that stuff, it's not perfect. So imagine like busy people, they are working and they don't notice there is a price went crazy up, and that, let's say 1 hour they consume the electricity makes their bill crazy go up, right? So I think this would any country would want to avoid that people get crazy bills like electricity, because when you make it free market, right, it depends on weather forecast and everything up and down. It's good on one hand, but on another hand, I would worry about low-income people and these crazy bills. Can you comment on that?
Okay, Tamaki-san, I can comment. Thank you. Yeah. Actually, thank you for raising this question. Okay, first of all, I miss this Maharashtra electricity state board. It's not only state board. Actually, I miss the Indian power sector. And in Japan, actually that's same. So my home electricity bill is now double. So my wife is claiming about that. And now, so we should separate two issues. Number one is that to avoid any fluctuation, big fluctuation, or absorb that kind of, keeping the stability. That is number one. And number two is that, but in the final day, the nation, Japan is a great importer of the coal and LNG. So Japanese government or household should pay at the final day about that gap. But so we should treat that two matters differently. And in Japan, actually, from next month, government provides subsidy to prosumers. I would say 20 United States cents per kilowatt hour. So it's quite big for some 2 months. So government should consider about stabilizing this electricity, as well as government should consider particularly low income household to support more financial subsidy. That is true, but we can combine this kind of government policy to stabilizing and support local people, as well as we can combine with this market-driven incentive and disincentive pricing system. Tamaki-san, any supplement?
Well, well, he's talking about the COVID time, and when work from home becomes necessary.
Okay.
It's a bit unavoidable. To pay instead of the company paying for like a work time, power consumption, you will have to pay out of your own pocket for your home power bill. So it's in a sense unavoidable, but you can, those who can afford, you can use power storage, home power storage, like a Tesla Powerball. And
okay.
That's, yeah.
Okay, Tamaki-san, sorry. Again, it's quite interesting, because we asked, requested by Government of Japan, Ministry of Environment. We are now doing some analysis. So because of this COVID, everybody is now working at home, as well as using their time. So it's clear that we don't need physical office. So we can save the energy efficiency, energy usage, consumption at the office. It's clear. Another issue is that people do not move less. People do move less. So the train is not so frequent. So we can reduce the transmission, transport energy. But on the other hand, people use the more electricity or more energy at home. So at the macro level, so at the final day, how much the energy consumption per capita would be reduced or increased? So that kind of analysis with some survey we are doing. But so answering that point, maybe the company, because they can save the money by providing the office, so they should pay more salary to the employees. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tamaki-san and Sakai-san, for correcting me. I was thinking about electricity tariff price, right? But you said the total bill. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah, maybe our audience meant the total bill increased. Yeah, actually, when it's very cold, sometimes I'm thinking maybe I should work from office so I can save on the heating bill. I don't have to heat my home. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. So I think from your explanation, I realized that for government important, not only this to have data, but also to know how to compensate to low income groups. I think we learned from COVID that not all countries can do this efficiently. Like sometimes people who are not supposed to get subsidies or grants or some payment, some aid, sometimes they received. So these things need to be done carefully, because when price will start fluctuating, yeah, I worry about this low income groups. But your suggestion to have this maximum price ceiling, I think that's a good solution. And I think that even with the more renewable energy we have, it might be that people will start earning from consuming energy, right? I think in some countries, they had that they exported electricity at negative price. And do you think such case could come to to consumers of electricity, right? So that could be excellent for some people, right? They when electricity price will come zero or even negative.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I admire Elon Musk. So he created and introduced that concept. By combining the electric vehicle EVs, the Tesla Model 3, together with Powerwall, together with the solar rooftop. So then, as Dina mentioned, that maybe Elon Musk dreamed that kind of a zero emission or negative emission house. And it's technically and financially a little bit challenging even at this moment to complete, to make such kind of the complete set. But I believe that in DMCs, particularly the off-grid, electrification, so it's more realistic that suppose in a village, there are some shared community solar power together with some small rooftop in each village house. Then people can share that kind of power, not in the house itself, but in the community level. So actually, as you know very well, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, United Nations, World Bank, ADB trying to introduce that model. And we have some constraint. Number one is capacity, and number two is how to calculate the sell and buy the electricity. But with this IoT, technology, we can easily, we can easily introduce that kind of a net zero, decentralized, digitalized solar economy. So I believe ADB's role and the government policymakers' role is quite high. Thank you.
And Dina, there's one question from anonymous attendee. With the load shifting, energy market pricing and its cost implication, what projects are better to deploy? ICE using LNG, energy storage. I don't understand ICE. What is this ICE means?
I don't know. Maybe if the person who asked question, can you type another question, writing what ICE means? I was thinking intermittent. No, it cannot be intermittent.
LNG must be liquefied natural gas. Yeah. What's ICE?
Maybe intermittent something. Internal combustion.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, internal. Yeah. This is the great. Oh no, sorry. This is the great question actually, because we are quite technology neutral, and we do not have any ideology. So we support renewable energy, and we support the low carbon. So using this kind of data, hourly power generation and the CO2 factor or energy price, each researchers with their own methodology, they can analyze the value and they can compare the economic or social advantage of this decentralized energy storage or big energy storage like a power, Tesla is now doing, or big LNG. And again, we can consider the timeline. So if you consider that for next 10 years, in some country, still LNG is lower than the average CO2 factor, then the lifetime cost can be lifetime cost and income can be calculated for each, energy types, fossil resource types. So I am quite neutral. So with some assumption, with data, you can compare that kind of economic comparative advantage. Thank you.
Yeah, I think investment-wise, you will have to try many different things. I mean, this demand management is basically cheap way instead of the big investment. But you still have to do, like a storage, big storage, infrastructure in case of, big surge, unavoidable big surge. So I think there's no, perfect single answer, but you have to try, many different things so that the resilience can be improved.
And again, please let me repeat again. So this person are talking about cost implication. Now you should consider two cost implication. One is kilowatt hours cost implication. Another one is CO2 emission cost implication. What I'm trying to say is that people are talking about energy storage, batteries, as well as EV, V2G. They tend to consider only the gap of the price of electricity at peak time and off-peak time. But you should also calculate the additional value of the time shift of this kind of a CO2 emission factor. So combining this CO2 emission factor, CO2 value, reduction value, as well as this electricity value itself, and you can compare using some models. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I also really liked in your slides, you showed, I think it's a bill from US, where they showed if you save, like what do you benefit, save energy, benefit, and then on the right side, the ways how you benefit, like reduce temperature on aircon, many dollars. Yeah, that one. And then like all the points like going less dollars mark. So everyone understand, like by adjusting temperature on AC, you can save really many dollars. That's the most, I think, like significant change you can do, and small changes. So I think in some countries, in developing countries particularly, maybe I think they should think how to communicate with customers, with consumers of electricity. It's not just billing, just, okay, you owe us this much this month, and that's it, right? But actually they can do their contribution to CO2 reduction, to greenhouse gas emission reduction, right? I lived in Singapore. The bill was amazing also. I loved it because on the electricity bill, they showed me graph, where's my electricity consumption, and also typical property of my size in my neighborhood, how much consume. And they always put, you are very efficient consumer, because I consumed very little electricity. Yeah, so I was always happy about that. So I don't, actually in Japan, I don't receive any bills. It's automatically from my bank account. Yeah, but I think government should start thinking how to use this power of affecting consumers, right? Not only how to change the supply, but also how to affect consumption, how to keep demand in control.
Yeah,
thank you very much. Okay, sorry. Okay. Yeah. First, you mentioned about the power of nudge. I mean, the famous nudge theory developed by UK's team comprise 4 factors. One is easy, and another one is attractive. Third one is social implication, and last one is timely intervention. So you are talking about let people consider about in the position of society. So that is quite a meaningful tool. And Tamaki-san, maybe you can tell about the US case and Japan case also. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, this electricity bill in US normally shows past 1 year, data. And that also, as just Dina said, you are better or worse than typical, household of your size. And like a smiley face or sad face, that kind of things are always on the bill. And that, this demand management nudge style is now very easy because most people already have a smartphone. And the power utility will send SNS, 1 day in advance and tell you what to do if you want to, earn some money as a, credit or rebate. And that's a rather cheap way to manage, demand. And that's made available because of this weather forecast advancement.
Great. Yeah, many thanks. Yeah, I think this can be, you said the cheapest way. I really like it. So this is cost-effective way, right? For countries.
I think so. Yeah.
Because when people think about this going greenhouse gas emissions down, improve air quality, everyone automatically we start thinking expensive technologies, right? Like renewable energy, solar PV, lithium-ion batteries, right? But there are cheap and cost-effective ways which can be used. And like you said, even bills don't have to be printed. These days, they can be sent by email or to smartphone. So even no need to worry about printing cost. And I guess these bills generated automatically, right? Somehow by the some program, not human made, right? As long as they collect data. Yeah. So I was really happy to learn about this nudge theory. I wasn't aware of this that much before. Yeah. So this is very interesting. And I think it's there are many benefits, right? It's for energy security benefit, right? We really need to reduce energy demand, especially developing Asia demand, growing so fast. It will be 2/3 of energy demand growth comes from developing Asia by 2040, calculated by IEA. So because developing Asia, we have high population growth, income growth, energy access improvements, right? So the issues of energy security will be more and more. And I think it's hard to satisfy all the energy demand with renewable energy. Like even if you install every roof everywhere.
Yeah, okay. Dina, we have another question from Jasper. So it's quite, can I shift to this question, Dina?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Again, Tamaki-san, please introduce the case of the United States market where demand response can be monetized by consumers. Let me introduce Japan's case. In some really tight situation, that JEPX, the power exchange price, could be $5 per kilowatt hours, and it's not special. In the United States, UK also the same thing can now happen actually. 1 kilowatt hours could be $10 or something. In that case, if consumer can save 1 kilowatt hours, then the power companies can save the cost to buy the electricity, which means that the consumer can get $9 per kilowatt hours if he can really prove the reduction from baseline. So that kind of concept is now already realized in Japan, but more advanced in United States. So Tamaki-san, can you kindly introduce that
Yeah, well, normally the baseline is your consumption figure during the past 1 week or 2 weeks. I mean, that's depending on the utility you talk about. So when you use 100 kilowatt hour for the last week, and if you don't use on that specific day only 50 kilowatt hour, then you get the 50 kilowatt hour credit. That's how things work in US, and many utilities already doing this for years. And yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and again, you should consider the time shift effect. So, okay, nighttime because supply is quite limited. So the exchange rate, I mean, the electricity price could be very high, like $5 US per kilowatt hours. But on the other hand, at daytime, people should use more renewable energy because renewable energy's, variable cost is zero. So also the government and the power company should encourage the consumers to use more power in the daytime, which means that to encourage the time shift, even though the total energy usage is unchanged. So that kind of incentive mechanism should be developed even in developing member countries, I think.
Many thanks. Yeah, I understood. So my key takeaways, not only, so countries can affect consumers in total energy consumption, total electricity consumption, but also time of use. So to consume more renewable energy, because at night, what energy will be used from? Energy storage, expensive, right? Fossil fuel or expensive storage. So it's better to consume during like when wind is strong or when solar, like when sun is shining, right? So like you said, marginal cost equals zero. So to control not only total consumption of consumers, but also at what time they consume electricity. Interesting, in US, it's opposite to UK. US, you say at night is more expensive, but in UK, opposite, we try to consume at night. At night was cheaper.
Well, that still in Japan. I mean, that's probably doesn't make sense anymore. I think they have to think about it again. I mean,
yeah. So
maybe it depends on the operation rate of the nuclear power plant. So in Japan also, the portfolio of a nuclear power plant is quite used to be high, and we really apologize that the accident of the Fukushima. So after the Fukushima accident in 2011, basically Japanese nuclear power plants were all stopped. That's why nighttime demand supply gap is quite tight. Then we changed. But maybe in other developed countries, the proportion of the nuclear power plant is quite high. That's why that situation is now happening in UK.
Very interesting point. So since as portfolio of energy, what electricity generated from, like countries getting more solar, more wind, so you probably government will reconsider the pricing, right? So then it makes unpredictable what future electricity price will be. So if now countries used to, some countries has fixed or only day and night, now it's unpredictable, right? What countries will shift towards pricing. So what do you think is the future of electricity pricing? Will it change?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, again, as Dina, you rightly mentioned that combining the financial incentive together with Nash theory, non-financial incentive, we can promote the consumers as well as the industrial companies to promote shift the time shift usage. And on top of that, we should consider the international, cooperation, because it's my personal view. Okay, I am a little bit afraid that each countries are now competing or bargaining or buying at higher price of the LNG or coal fire. As a result, the market price of LNG and coal could be quite higher than at this moment. And I'm sorry about Japan is playing a very main role of that price competition. So to create the more sustainable and more harmonized, market of this fossil, fuel like a coal or LNG or oil, we should work together to make a forward-looking, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, low cost as well as high technology, as well as low carbon emission, fossil power plant together with nuclear, together with renewable. So let's forget about zero-sum theory, 100% renewable or 100% coal. It's quite nonsense. So we should work together and we should consider together about the balance of this kind of and ensure the energy security as well as decarbonization. Thank you.
Many thanks. So I think the time is nearly up. Tamaki-san and Sakai-san, would you like to wish something to our audience, our researchers on this topic, like final words? Thank you.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for paying attention to our session. And we are quite happy to work together. And it's a big data and a little bit challenge for non-Japanese speaker is it's a Chinese character written. But the data itself, CSV file itself is numeric. So don't worry about that. So we can help all the researchers to access this kind of data. And we are quite happy to work together with DMCs. So thank you very much. Tamaki-san, please.
Yeah, it's very nice to talk to you guys in the audience. And that I will see you again tomorrow as a discussant of paper 9. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sakai-san, Tamaki-san. Excellent training. I highly enjoyed it. I learned a lot. So I hope our audience also, and all the links. We will put your presentation slides on our website. So our audience can also go to these links you kindly provided with open access. And can see themselves. I'm sure with nowadays technology, Google Translator, it will be not a big problem to translate websites. So thank you so much for that. I would like to invite everyone for a short break. We're gonna have a short break and see you in like 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes.
Thanks, Dina.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Hello, hello, Biralo. Crossley, can you hear me? Hello, Crossley, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear
okay.
me?
Yeah, can you speak louder? I couldn't hear you clearly. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Now?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so I would like to check your internet connection. So would you mind sharing your screen?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
I have to share the slides?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Can you make it like full screen?
Yes, I'm doing it. What is happening?
It's not full screen. Yes.
Wait a minute. Actually,
In the low right corner, there's a symbol. You can just click on that.
I have to.
Oh, Panika, can you share it again? I mean, it's good sharing it. Panika, are you here? Panika, are you there? Yeah. Can you hear me, Jane? Panika, Jane?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm
Yeah.
sharing my slide again.
Yeah. Can you share it again and make it like full slide?
Yes. Is it fine now?
Yeah. Can you moving down to the next few slide?
Yeah, I'm moving. Is it moving?
Yeah. It's perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah. And stay connected. I'm gonna see you in the next few minutes. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Hello, Pedro Crossley. I'm sorry. It's really difficult for me to pronounce the name.
That's all right.
Yeah. So I would like to check your internet connection. So would you mind sharing your slide?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Just going to. Sorry.
It's okay.
It's okay. This is why we check, isn't it? It's just saying that I need to get out of Zoom and come straight back in. So I'll do that and I'll be back in 1 minute.
Okay.
Won't
No
be
problem.
Seconds. Or maybe not. Maybe it will let me do it. Let me see. Oh, no.
Hello, Venkatachalam Ambumosi. Can you hear me? Hello. I couldn't hear you, Crossley. You mute.
This should now work, hopefully.
Okay.
I'm just going to read that.
Okay. Can you moving down to the next few slide?
Yeah. Sorry, I'll just get it. Sorry.
Perfect.
Is that now working?
Yeah, it's working. Yeah, it's working now.
And you can't see my presenter notes, can you?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, so stay connected, and I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, Venkatachalam Ambumosi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're struggling with my name.
So how are you doing? So I would like to check your internet connectivity just to make sure everything is okay. Would you mind sharing your screen? Hello, Ambu. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you see
Yeah.
my screen?
Yeah. Can you make it like full slide, full screen?
Okay.
Yeah. Can you moving down to the next few slide? Okay, that's perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. And stay connected, and I'm looking forward to hearing you. Thank you so much. Hello, Brijanta. Can you hear me?
Why I cannot start my video?
Can you say that again?
Why I cannot start my video?
Oh,
Failed to
you mean
start
you
the video
cannot
camera.
like
Please
open your
select
camera?
Huh? Yeah, my
You
camera
mean...
is on.
Okay, can you try? I just clicked ask to turn your video on. Does it work?
No.
Okay. No?
Yeah. No?
Oh, it's appearing, it's disappearing. Okay, now it's on.
Yeah.
Dina, it's not me. I think somebody else was talking.
No, it's fine. It's working now.
Yeah.
Priyanta, you're muted.
Yeah, now only I'm talking. Somebody else was worried about the the video, not me.
Okay.
There's me, Anbu.
Anbu, sorry about that. Just a second.
I don't know why I cannot put on my video.
Okay. I try to.
Does it work, Anbu?
I asked you to. I request you to like turn on your camera. Is this working? Can you see this?
No, I can't. And it seems ADY people doesn't want to see my face.
No.
Can you see my request? I just asked. I just clicked
Yes.
but can you just answer my request? I think it should be fine.
Yeah, I clicked down the start my video, but it doesn't work. There is a message that is cannot start video.
Okay, I will promote you to co-host, and then I'll make you panelist. Kumiko-san, can you please promote Anbu to co-host? He'll put video on, and after that, again, back to panelist.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay, it doesn't matter, huh?
Okay, let's, meanwhile, we'll start. We'll try to put your camera on, Anbu. We'll make you co-host, maybe. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining next session. This is day one of the 3-day seminar workshop. And we have wonderful session now for promoting clean energy, and will be chaired by my colleague, Priyanta. He is Chief of Energy Sector Group of Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of the ADB in Manila. So he has over 30 years of professional experience, including 14 years in ADB. Full bio can be found on link via chat. Priyanta, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dina. It's great to join again. The session 3 on promoting clean energy. Under this workshop, ADBI virtual workshop on energy transition from coal to low carbon future. As you can see, this is a very important, workshop overall, of course. And then this particular session in particular, we have 2 presenters in this session. And of course, both papers are going to be discussed with 2 discussants, very eminent people, both presenters as well as the discussants. Let me, without taking much time, let me quickly hand over to the first presenter. The first paper is going to be on what legal and policy lessons can be learned from coal exporting nations for the energy transition to a low carbon future. I'm pretty sure it's going to be very interesting. We're basically trying to learn from the fossil fuel, experience, to see how we can move forward in the low carbon transition. And the presenter is going to be Professor Penelope Crossley. And she is actually an associate professor of energy law and SOAR fellow from Sydney Law School, from the University of Sydney. And she is in fact an expert in the complex legal issues associated with energy transition, including renewable energy and energy storage law and electricity market governance. She has a PhD in international and comparative renewable energy law and runs the energy law program at the University of Sydney Law School. In fact, it's going to be interesting. In fact, I have been in the energy sector for such a long time. This is the first time I'm going to listen to somebody who is going to look at the legal side of the energy transition and the law. Thanks so much. It's over to you, Penelope, for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. So before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that today I'm on the lands of the Gadi people of the Eora Nation, and this is something that we always do at the University of Sydney. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm coming from you today. So as we know, the Asia Pacific region really needs to be the focus for the energy transition. And that's because we have historically used very significant amounts of fossil fuels. And part of the reason for that is that we've historically been considered to be very energy insecure, very dependent on fossil fuel imports. And even amongst the nations that have had, energy self-sufficiency, those nations have historically been highly dependent on a single fuel source or have had much of their production already committed to long-term contracts, often to actually other countries in the region. So Japan, South Korea, China in particular. Now, I know I don't have to convince anyone here why we have to transition to clean energy. I think it's pretty obvious. But one of the most interesting impacts of this for me is that it's fundamentally going to shift the geopolitics of energy. So no longer will fossil fuel poor nations be reliant on fossil fuel imports from energy exporting nations to provide their primary energy source and hence their security of supply. Now, this means that countries will need to retire their existing generation fleet, either build or reinforce the grid, build new community energy infrastructure, and also develop their own indigenous renewable energy sources. And this provides us with an opportunity to really look at new approaches to energy markets and national energy laws. And what I'm suggesting as part of this paper is that we can learn from the mistakes of the fossil fuel exporters, and they've made more than their fair share, and not repeat them as part of this transition. So I think I wanted to flag with you 3 common errors that I believe that fossil fuel exporters have made in their energy laws and policies, and then also talk to you about some additional considerations that I think are important for renewable energy producing nations. So the first issue that I see in almost all of the fossil fuel exporters is that due to their energy self-sufficiency, they haven't been traditionally concerned with energy security. So what you see in their energy laws is that their laws tend to be much more concerned about maintaining their security of demand for energy exports due to the significant contribution that those exports play to their gross domestic product. But with the global push for all countries to decarbonise, these countries will all now need to be concerned with energy security. And that's related to my next point, is that they've also generally failed to diversify the national energy mix and to reduce the risk of shocks. Now, Australia is a really good case study for this, because despite the fact that we are a significant exporter of coal and also of liquefied natural gas, the picture I've got on the slide there is actually an LNG import terminal. Now, it's pretty amazing that as the world's second largest producer of LNG, we have had to build an import terminal because we simply assumed that we wouldn't export our LNG. And then suddenly we opened up the east coast of Australia to particularly the Japanese market. And all of a sudden, LNG, which had historically been a very cheap source of gas for Australia, and which consumers had been encouraged to use, suddenly became very, very expensive. And we also found that much of our gas was under long-term contracts, and we lack sufficient supply, such that we've actually had a gas crisis in the last 12 to 18 months. And they're now having to import in liquefied natural gas to the world's second largest gas exporter. The other thing that we've seen about a failure to diversify supply is that countries like Australia haven't been immune from the consumer electricity price shocks that we've seen in most nations around the world from events such as Russia invading Ukraine. If you're an international market participant, you need to actually assume that you'll be affected by international events, and it just drives up the price of everyone, including domestic consumers. The other problem that I've seen a lot of is that they've failed to appropriately plan for the end of life and decommissioning. And what I mean by that is that generally, when we get to decommissioning, the project has reached the end of its economic life. And the general base case for what you have to do when you decommission is you have to return the local environment to as close to the original condition at the conclusion of the project as is possible. So this generally might mean removing infrastructure prior to the surrender of a mining license or a generation license or a petroleum lease. And whilst in some places around the world you can do partial decommissioning, such as remediation or retention of the foundations of offshore platforms or toppling to create artificial reefs, all these options pose environmental risks and are costly. So what we've started to see is that we've started to see a lot of litigation in this sector. And I suspect that this is also going to flow through to renewables, that governments have failed to take sufficient account of the costs involved in decommissioning. We see many companies declaring bankruptcy immediately prior to the decommissioning phases of their projects. We see insufficient security being taken for decommissioning costs, and also a failure to review regularly the security costs in line with the advent of new environmental standards or new environmental technologies. And to give you an idea of just how severe this is, the shortfall in Australia, in one Australian state of 7 that we have, I think it's 7, got to double check that, was that the shortfall in remediation and rehabilitation costs for 190,000 hectares of land affected by coal mines was estimated to be over $3.25 billion. That is how badly they had the numbers wrong. And so when those numbers are wrong, those cost burdens get imposed on taxpayers, and that's something that needs to be paid for by project proponents. So when we're talking about renewable energy, we now need to think about, well, what kind of policy decisions and legal decisions do countries need to think about? The first decision they need to make is, are they seeking an energy independence model, which I would suggest will probably only be the case in geographically isolated and islanded nations, such as Australia and the Pacific Island nations, where the international electricity connectors are just simply too expensive and difficult to install, and you suffer from load losses. But the counterbalance of that is you then can't diversify as effectively. Now, query whether batteries will help us with this, but these are all quite significant decisions to make. Or will you alternatively take a regional security approach, which is the approach that the EU has taken, and it means that it's likely to be more cost competitive because it doesn't require nations to have as much installed additional capacity to reach peak demand. But it also means that then you've got international interconnectors and infrastructure, which, as we've learned from the Russia-Ukraine example, then creates potential for sabotage in the event of conflicts. And we know that in our region, we have historically been quite slow in parts of the region to actually have interconnectors because of concerns with national security and the amount of data that needs to be transferred. The second issue that I see a lot of is that we're going to be moving to an environment where we will no longer be in a space where international energy disputes will be about subsidies and local content. I would suggest to you that in an environment where we have 80 to 90% of the world's high-grade polysilicon coming from a single geographic region, we run the risk and particularly with rare earths as well, that high levels of market concentration, complex supply chains, if you see a trade restriction or a physical disruption, this is going to cause real problems for nations. And this is going to be the next area that I expect to be litigated. The third challenge for renewable energy producing nations is that within our region, we have a number of very large megacities, and they don't actually have a lot of excess land available. We know that renewable energy projects tend to be quite land intensive. So you're either in the situation where you'll have to develop greenfield sites away from major population centres or manufacturing sites, or you'll do brownfields infill on existing industrial land, or in some cases from retired fossil fuel plant, or you're looking at coexisting projects. So that's where we talk about things like agrivoltaics, sharing photovoltaics on particularly sheep farming. It turns out the sheep quite like the shade from the solar cells. But all of these are challenges. And historically, within the fossil fuel context, we've had a very clear regulatory structure so that if you've got a project on the same land as being used by another occupant of that land, there's a clear legal process for determining who gets access when. What we find with renewable energy is that structure doesn't apply. So you need to find incentives to keep the neighbours happy. And so what we're now seeing is that, for example, onshore wind developers are paying off the neighbours, even if they don't have a wind turbine on their property, to reduce noise complaints, to reduce complaints about having a wind turbine affecting their view. So I just want to flag, I'm not going to talk to all these policy recommendations. I've got them in the slide. Some of them are fairly self-evident. You know, we've got to integrate our renewable energy law with our climate law. But there are a couple I just want to very briefly speak to. The first one is coal subsidies. So one of the challenges for us is that countries that have had large indigenous reserves of coal have been very reluctant to shift away from it in their national energy laws. So up until 2020 in Australia, we actually were subsidising waste coal bed methane. And one of the more worrying developments for me is that in the new draft new and renewable energy bill before the Indonesian parliament, their definition of new energy includes coal bed methane, hydrogen, liquefied and gasified coal. And that means that potentially, if that law is passed, fossil fuel project developers may be able to benefit from very similar incentives to renewable energy project developers. Now, these actions are very popular in coal-rich regions of the world, but that will actually slow our ability to hit the UNFCCC's target of net zero by 2050, and it will make it impossible to phase out all unabated coal by 2040. The other thing that I just wanted to flag is that in Australia, we've had to change our laws because we had a problem in 2017 where a 1.6 gigawatt coal-fired power station closed with only 5 months' notice. It provided power to up to 400,000 homes and 750 local jobs. And it caused a lot of grid instability and power impacts. And that actually led to a government review, which meant that in Australia now, generators have to give 3.5 years notice of an intention to close a coal-fired power station. So we're really trying to get an orderly and coordinated mass retirement of the coal generation fleet so that we can make sure that we have the renewables and the batteries in place to ensure that it doesn't impact on reliability and grid stability. The only other point that I probably really want to talk to is about one of the new ways that we're talking about liability within the energy sector. So one of the developments that has come from the petroleum sector, and I would suggest ought to also go to the renewable energy sector, is the adoption of boomerang or trailing decommissioning liabilities. So what that means is if towards the end of life, you sell your project onto another party, and you don't just sell your assets, you also sell your liabilities, which means that decommissioning liability. And if that subsequent purchaser is unable to rehabilitate the site to the environmental standards that are expected, that obligation then reverts back to the previous owner to undertake the work and to bear the cost. Now, this is a very effective way of ensuring that when you're on-selling a project, you're not doing it to get out of your obligation, and that you've also done sufficient due diligence on prospective buyers. And this has also been coupled with an increase of government oversight. And I would suggest to you that I think that this will be absolutely critical in the context of offshore wind liability. So as you can see, you can read through the rest of my slides. I have views about Mono Industries, and I've got views about who should bear the cost. But thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Crossley, for that very interesting presentation. Let me now invite Dr. Venkatachalam Anbu Moshi, the discussant, to discuss this paper. He is the Director of Research, Strategy and Innovations, the Economist Research Institute, ASEAN and East Asia, Indonesia. Let me invite him to discuss the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyantha. And I do remain invisible, but my slides are visible. And I congratulate Professor Pranapol and for bringing this interesting paper that has the kind of legal approach, or the doctrinal legal approach, and it have a kind of critical thinking on the policies that is evolving in Australia, and taking the country that is Australia as a kind of a case study. And the title, I think the contents justify the title. That is what legal and policy lessons can be learned from this coal exporting nation, that is Australia. And it tries to find a kind of a common kind of an understanding for the other exporting countries, but it will be a little bit different. And it takes Australia as a case study, and it is not there in the paper, but if you look into Australian low carbon energy transition, this is what happens and what are the facts. One is Australia has this net zero target by 2050. It is another 30 years how it is going to be achieved. That most of them will need to be happening in the coal sector. And Australia has not committed for the coal phase down like other exporting countries like Indonesia or Vietnam, but the coal power plant disclosures are accelerated. I think that is what the Australian government states in its 2030, 2050. And then coal has been decreasing. It is gradual, but still account nearly more than 50% of this power mix. It is the second largest thermal coal power exporter, and solar PV is increasing. And also the employment from the coal mining is decreasing, but as of now, around 40,000 people are getting employed, and though it is shrinking. So I think Pranapol has brought out this narrative of this decarbonization under the energy security, and I think that is a good articulation that he defines improving the energy access and the reduced energy affordability, and then there will be another dimension if you look into these other coal exporting countries like Indonesia or Vietnam, and here it is also pollution. And this brings the kind of narratives for decarbonization that brings the kind of coal pace out. But at the same time, this energy security is also related to the dynamism between the other fossil fuel resources like LNG and crude oil. And here, I think this dynamism has to be looked into it, and the nexus has to be explicitly given. This paper also articulate there are two different approaches for the energy security. One is on the energy independent approach. It is more autonomous. But the regional security, if your country or the economy is very much integrated, and how it will look like. And I think that is where also Australia is getting more integrated with this part of the region, particularly Asia Pacific. At the same time, it is energy independent. And here that is the dilemma comes. Here there is one example. I think Penople's paper also look into the end of life of the coal generation. And one example that is we can critically look into is that can solve many problems or many of the dilemmas. If any coal transition is, that is a German example. And the in 1950s, and it produces 150 million tons of the hard coal, and it employed around 600,000 coal miners. But if you look into now, and it has already completely phased out, it absorbed the shocks, particularly in the 1970s, the first oil crisis. Then the momentum continued, and then when these two Germanies integrated and US influences also getting emerged, then they go for the structural changes. I think that the structural changes are maybe not partly coming from this EU and partly coming from the national regulations, that kind of incentives. And by 1997, they completely stopped the incentives. That is for the coal mining. So this is one case that is we can look into that model and how it takes, how the structural transformation reforms that happen at the domestically that is married to this regional integration process, and then finally it helped out and this phase out. But if you look into these emerging economies like Indonesia and Vietnam and India, and this story will be very difficult, and it is the kind of results that is coming from our area study done about 3 years back, and we see that is the when you are thinking about the coal export, one is that is the raw material that is we are export for the other markets. Another thing is also your domestic consumption. So this domestic consumption will be shrinking in the low carbon. Then this economic impact, this is, I think the Penople's paper looked into that is another alternative that renewable energy is going to replace it, where the technology and the mineral, critical minerals requirements has been brought in. And this will be a complex story, and it will be a painful story for most of the emerging economies. And here for all these three economies, the Indonesia, South Africa, and India, we calculated it will be a drastic impact on this economy. And here we can see, zoom in, that is what will be happening in Indonesia. And if this is a complete whole phase out and done by 2035, and the GDP will be shrinking, and then current account balance will be increasing, and then electricity price, somebody need to pay for it, and that electricity price will be improving, and then emissions will be reduced. Okay, so this is a kind of, it is not going to be a win-win story for the short term, and it will be a kind of some winners and some losers. Another, if you zoom in and experiences of German, and this is what happened, and when German underwent this coal phase out, and you can see there is from the 1960s to 1980s the unemployment has been increasing, and that has the social implications. And then from 1980 to 2006, and we find kind of a plot. And then this plot is also supplemented by this new employment generation that happened in the renewable energy sector. And then it is basically, then this coal sector unemployment comes down, and basically the other industry, that is the renewable energy and particularly the solar and wind, they taken up. This is how the structural transformation happened, and this comes from these regulations and the legal basis, and as well as the political commitment that is made. There is it is kind of influence that is made by the Green Party, and but we need to look into that, not only the economy but also social implications also are important. And this is the paper talked about the mono industries, and here there is how the German and the most of the another Poland also has a similar story to tell. And here to how to avoid this mono industry. Here we find a kind of three-pronged strategies. One is looking at the workers and what type of compensation you give for the workers. Second thing is what type of structural transformation that is that happening at the community level that need a kind of a much more focused and comprehensive approaches. Third one is the coal companies, and Penapul mentioned about this boomerang liability. I think this theory could go into this how to provide the incentives for the coal companies. So there are a lot of 5 recommendations. But this is my kind of a takeaway from this paper, and this is low carbon energy transition is like a snowflake, and if you look into it, it cannot be a one size fit for all, and it is very difficult to generalize. During the coal phase out, the government should incentivize the deployment of other renewable energy industries. And third part is continuous technological innovations is needed. And this innovations, there should be the legal basis should be flexible to give the kind of a stability, and it cannot be a kind of one-time penalties. And third and the last point that is missing in this discussion is the community dialogue and the engagement of the losers. That is very much important. And by bringing the narratives, and my time is up, but if time permits, and if the space permits, Penapul can look into these 3 major questions, whether we have the right answers for this one. And one is, what is the cost of the transformation, and how the cost is shared between the public and private sectors. And I think your proposition on this this boomerang liability has many stories to tell about it. How this cost sharing could be done it, and also, and the second thing is looking at the other experiences, the German or Indonesian, it is going to take at least 50 years, and if of the complete phase out. So at the meantime, there is the energy market integration is happening up, and how this regional cooperation can guide these coal exporting countries. I think that is one question. That is the Indonesia, and then India, and South Africa, and what does it mean for these countries if they are coming together, and that story could be built out. And third one is that it's a very difficult. I think I'm not a legal expert, and you mentioned about the geopolitics, and here you see how to guide the legal and the decision-making promotion to promote the low carbon investments that have the long-term potential for success, but potentially the limited short-term political attractiveness. It happened in Australia and the carbon pricing. So how we can make it, and when we are looking for the long-term values, but the short-term geopolitics are the political solutions are there. So what could be the right formula, and what could be the right legal and decision framework at the federal level and at the state level? And I think these 3 questions you could further explore when you have time and space. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Venkatachalam. Would you like to respond to that closely, briefly, before we invite questions from others?
I just want to say thank you. That was incredibly helpful, and I might be in contact about some of that further research. One thing to add is that what we have seen is where countries link things like carbon pricing mechanisms to energy security, they're much more likely to have high political attractiveness and success. So I think the problem with Australia's carbon price is it was actually quite politically popular when they scrapped it, but it was easy for them to scrap it because for them it was just an environmental mechanism, and our Conservative political party didn't support that. Whereas if it had been linked very closely to we need this for energy security, that is a line that would not have flown politically. So.
Right. Thank you very much. I don't see any questions at the moment in the question and answer box. From my side, let me, these are very important points. You highlighted what you can learn from the coal, sector, and how to translate that into the new, regime of renewable energy, sector, renewable energy investments. I'm just wondering, do we usually have in the current setup the clear demarcation of what needs to be included in the form of the law, the legislation, as against in the policies and regulations? Because obviously, you very well know it's easier to change regulations and the policies as against changing the law. You just quoted how difficult it is when it goes back to the parliament and try to get a law done. So probably what is, the experience in the coal sector maybe, can be translated easily in that sense, what needs to be included in the renewable energy sector in the law, and then the rest of it. Any thoughts about it?
So I, for my PhD, looked at every country in the world's renewable energy laws, which was incredibly painful, but very interesting. And one of the reasons why you want to put things in law rather than in regulation or policy is it's a very clear market signal, which is because it is hard to change. And so I think in terms of giving investors and project developers a sense of security that actually this is the direction that we are now going in, as you would know, it is actually very unusual. I think Australia is the only country in the world to have introduced and then removed a carbon price. It doesn't happen often. It was a really unfortunate political mistake. And ever since then, the government has been trying to basically reintroduce a carbon price without calling it a carbon price, and coming up with a whole range of different permutations to achieve the same legal effect, because they made some political errors in the law. So I think one of the great challenges is, and this is why I'm slightly concerned about the Indonesian draft bill, is when you are putting into your definition of new energy things like coal seam gas, you are sending a signal to the coal industry that actually we are going to keep providing you with subsidies and investment opportunities for the coal sector. And that is a wrong signal to be sending, particularly when we need to really link our energy law with our climate law so that there is no confusion. This isn't a political issue. We're beyond that now. We all agree that climate change is real. We need to take very, very clear action on it.
Yeah, you're very right. That's very true. Yeah. When you bring in the wrong things into the law, basically you are stuck with it. At least in the regulations and policies, you can change it a little bit when you really feel that it's not the right thing to do. But in the law, you are stuck with it. You're quite right. Is somebody else coming in? I heard somebody's.
May I? I think it is me
please.
and Priyanta.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, that I do agree with you. And if we look into what's happening in Indonesia and India and even this NDCs and the coal phase out, they don't have the kind of a legal framework. And I think we need to see, I understand it. Now, the companies that is a coal power plants that is asked to cut down are going to the courts. And this kind of legal framework is a basic necessity. It is necessary for coal, but also the renewables. And renewables, what we have is a kind of policy instruments, not the legal framework governing the long term. And this part, for example, this feed-in tariff, and this is a short-term signals, and for 1 year or maximum of 2 years, and there is not give a kind of a legal framework for the companies to operate, and so that has to be done. And second thing is something that is happening in India. For example, the carbon tax has been reduced. They're not explicitly say it is a carbon pricing mechanisms, but more important in carbon pricing mechanisms is this revenue neutrality, and this okay, you tax it and it changes the behavior, but how far this revenue being used, this tax revenue that is coming from. I think that is more important, whether we are going to incentivize the transition process, or you wanted to totally reduce the cost of this transition, or you're promoting the new type of industries. And here there is a need, countries need to look into it. And third one is also bringing the competitiveness. And our estimate shows that is in the short term, and you will be the losers. And the economic index will be severe. And the energy prices will be increasing. So what type of social safety nets you provide for the employers, for the communities, that is more important.
Thank you.
Can I jump in really quickly there?
Please. Yeah.
So we have the highest penetration of rooftop solar in the world, and that has happened in spite of a government that has scrapped a carbon price. So I think the thing to realize is that actually some of these things can be really socially popular, and a lot of that transition in Australia has actually occurred with minimal or moving away from subsidies now. We're really starting to move into a post-subsidy era. But countries like Australia and India and Indonesia, unfortunately, because of our legal situation, our constitutions actually make it quite hard to take national effective action on energy policy. I mean, the Indian constitution, the Australian constitution are similar on this. We share the power between the federal government or the national government and the state governments, and it makes it very hard to take that national action. Whereas somewhere like the Philippines has taken incredibly clear national action quite some years ago, and it has been quite effective.
Thank you very much, Professor Crossley. In the interest of time, we have two questions from the same person from the audience. Let me take one of them. Let me read it. Due to rise in import of coal price in India, that has increased, that has led to closure of small coal-based energy development factories. But they have also not moved for renewable energy development. This will reduce the amount of energy development. Whether this is a matter of concern, I'm not sure whether you got the question right. So what it says is that because of the increased cost of imported coal, small coal-based energy development factories have emerged, or rather led to closure of the small coal-based development, and therefore the renewable energy sector development has not moved. So whether this will reduce energy development, that's a matter of concern. That's quite subjective, I suppose, right?
It is, but then things like the fact that you've got 100% electrification of every village in India as a clear national government policy. And what it will mean is that some communities will skip grid infrastructure and move straight onto microgrids for that renewable energy development. So it will be interesting to see in India what actually happens to the energy transition, and whether they skip actually getting large-scale PV supply towards a more distributed energy model.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think now we are coming almost close to the Q&A session, and I'm sure you have got enough response from the discussion to improve the paper in those areas. And thank you very much, Professor Crossley, for the excellent presentation and responses you provided to the questions. Thank you very much. Let us now move to the next presenter. That's going to be on sustainable energy deploying in developing countries, the role of composition of energy aid. The presenter is Ms. Panika Jain. She's a research scholar in humanities and social sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Europa, India. And she's a doctoral student in IIT Europa, and her doctoral thesis examines aid effectiveness of environmental sustainability, considered in the development assistance as an important constituent of climate finance. So with that very short introduction of Panika, let me hand over to you for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Greetings to all. Today I'm going to present on the topic sustainable energy deployment in developing countries, the role of composition of energy aid. This paper is co-authored by my research supervisor, Dr. Samresh Vardhan. This is the overview of my presentation. As we all know that increase in greenhouse gas emission is considered to be the predominant cause of global warming, and energy-related CO2 emission represents 2/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions. And this increase in emission is likely to happen more in developing countries as we grow through rapid industrialization and urbanization. So substituting fossil fuel with renewable sources in developing countries appears to be crucial for achieving mitigation targets and sustainable SDG 7 targets, that is increasing affordable and clean energy. However, in developing countries, these investors face various financial, technical, policy, and information barriers, particularly to renewable technologies, because these technologies requires enormous investment, and private investors are reluctant to invest in new RE projects at the initial stage of adoption. Moreover, due to the high risk of upfront cost relative to expected monetary returns and longer payback period. Moreover, these technologies require a lot of capital-intensive technology, generally developed and imported from developed world. So for this, it is IEA in 2011 itself projected that out of around 18 USD billions required for clean energy transition, around 40% of funding should come from bilateral and multilateral donors till 2030. So how a concessional funding can play an instrumental role in overcoming all these barriers? First of all, through direct capital investment in distribution and direct funding of RE projects, it can reduce financial barriers. Through technical assistance, it can reduce policy and information barriers. It can help the domestic governments in institutional strengthening through creating enabling environment. Through co-financing projects, donors can help in mitigation of risk, particularly at the initial stage. It can also review the programs in the renewable sector and also help project demonstration to increase awareness among the investors and the domestic policy people, so that they can get this thing that renewable transition is not that we cannot achieve. Moreover, the study by Bertnane and Pizer in 2015 say that countries at the initial, donors have to support countries at the initial transition stage, and particularly with technologies that are less developed. So based on this background, we review following literature. Most of the literature on the effectiveness of ODA is generally related to aggregate aid. There are few studies that are related to energy sector. However, we find following research gaps. First, most of these few studies have used absolute measure of renewable deployment, but absolute measure of renewable deployment does not indicate the transition process, whether we are substituting to from fossil fuel to renewable sources or not. And moreover, these studies have not differentiated between hydro and non-hydro renewable sources. These two kind of sources are at different stage of maturity in the developing countries. Hydro is much more developed as compared to non-hydro renewable sources. So technically, non-hydro renewable sources requires much more attention of donors as compared to hydro. Then energy aid is not only provided to a single sector, it is provided to different aspects of energy sector, including hydro, including renewable, non-renewable, policy, and distribution. So it is better to follow the disaggregation approach to analyze the effectiveness of energy aid on renewable energy transition. Methodologically, most of the studies have employed static panel data estimation technique, but these techniques have not taken into account the issue of endogeneity, part dependency of renewable deployment indicators. And also, it is important to see whether these concessional funding coming to developing countries are effective at, what is the level of effectiveness at different energy transition. So given this research gap, we have the following objectives: to investigate whether the increase in energy aid support the substitution of fossil fuel for renewable sources in the power sector, to examine the impact of composition of energy aid on transition to clean energy sources, and to investigate whether energy aid is more effective in countries with low RE deployment and relatively less matured non-hydro renewable technologies. As you can see, energy aid has increased over a period of time from 2002 to 2004 to 2007 to 2019. However, we observe more fluctuation in funding post financial crisis, and the energy aid funding has increased sharply after the Kyoto Protocol, and also show the sharp increase after the Paris Agreement in 2016. As far as composition of energy aid concerned, you can see there's a lot of fluctuation in the data because of volatile funding, and per capita distribution aid is highest among all the sectors. And we observe, very interestingly, we also observe that despite the importance of renewable energy and renewable energy transition, donors have not stopped funding for this non-renewable aid. In certain period after the financial crisis, the non-renewable funding is more as compared to renewable funding. As far as the comparative analysis is concerned, from 2002 to 2003 to 2019 to 20, we observe that in figure 4, that this distribution and renewable funding has increased very much, whereas non-renewable and energy policy, non-renewable funding has reduced, whereas energy policy remain almost same in this decade. Based on this, we have the following. We want to study the impact of energy aid and its composition on the relative measure of renewable deployment. And for that, we use renewable electricity installed capacity share in total electricity installed capacity, which is further divided based on the technology, that is hydro and non-hydro installed capacity. These are our main independent variables, where we take into account aid to the energy sector, that is total aggregate energy aid, and different aids: aid for energy policy, aid for renewable energy generation, aid for non-renewable energy generation, and aid for energy distribution. These are our set of control variables based on the existing literature on renewable deployment. So we follow two methodology. The first is system GMM, because our main dependent variable is likely to exhibit path dependency, and funding may increase with the large scale sustainable energy use, making aid variable endogenous. So as specified in equation 1, REC is the share of renewable electricity installed capacity in total electricity installed capacity, and REC IT minus 1 is its lag variable, where aid is the different total energy aid and its different components. XIT is the vector of control variable, DT time dummies, NI country specific fixed effects that capture the difference in the natural domestic capacity to develop renewable technology, and EIT is the error term. We do the same analysis with renewable and hydro and non-hydro renewable technologies. So why apply two-step system GMM? Because in our case, number of developing countries is 67, and T is from 2002 to 2017, N is greater than T, and also to address the issue of persistency, endogeneity of lag dependent variables and energy aid variables, heterosidicity or autocorrelation within individuals. And it is more efficient than the difference GMM. And it can also estimate time invariant regressors. The second methodology we apply specifically to analyze the impact of OD and its component on the conditional distribution of renewable deployment indicator is panel quantile regression model with non-additive fixed effects and non-separable distribution term, developed by Powell in 2022. So we have used the same variables, and the model is estimated using Markov chain Monte Carlo optimization method. So based on this, this is the first findings, first set of findings based on the total renewable energy technologies. And we find that our lag dependent variable is positive and significant across all the models, justifying the use of system GMM. And then the main variables highlighted in the red color in slides indicate that energy aid is positive and significantly contributing to renewable transition. But however, when we turn to the composition aspect, we find that REG aid component is significant and the magnitude is very high, indicating that there are certain components of energy aid which is reducing the positive impact of energy aid for the renewable energy transition. Then non-renewable energy generation aid is negative, and it's significant in some model, whereas policy and distribution aid remain insignificant. Similarly, we done the same analysis for hydro renewable technologies and find the same result. But interestingly, when we change our dependent variable to non-hydro renewable technologies, we find that not only the total energy aid, but renewable energy aid and its all the components and are negative and significant, which indicates that donors are not supporting the transition with modern and non-hydro renewable technologies, which has yet to be developed in the developing countries. Again, we done the same analysis with the panel quantile regression, and we find that energy aid is effective in countries at in more lower, middle or lower quantile, not at the lower quantiles with hydro renewable technologies. And for non-hydro renewable technologies, it remains negative and significant for all the quantiles. And similarly, when we do the compositional aspect, we again find that renewable energy aid is positive and significant across all the quantiles, but it is not positive and significant for non-hydro renewable technologies, whereas the funding for non-renewable energy generation aid is negative and significant for across all the models and with all the technologies. So you can see that how harmful it is to get funding for non-renewable energy aid for the renewable energy transition for the developing countries. We observe that policy aid, which is for the development institutional development and for the policy aspect, is also negative and significant across all the technologies and all the models, whereas distribution aid for the transmission of energy sources is positive and significant with only hydro renewable technologies. So based on these empirical exercise, what we find is that energy aid and its components significantly derives the shift to low carbon electricity infrastructure only with hydro renewable technologies. Energy ODA remains counterproductive for REG, non-hydro renewable sources and hydro renewable sources in countries at the initial transition stage. It means that donors are not playing a catalyst role, and non-renewable energy generation and energy policy ODA significantly hampers the diffusion of renewable sources. ODA for energy distribution augments the recipient's capacity to adopt hydro renewable technologies. Based on these findings, we have following implications, policy implications, particularly for the increasing the transition in the developing countries. First, donors should change the composition of energy aid by supporting renewable deployment through direct funding of renewable energy projects and related distribution infrastructures. And donors should focus more on countries who are the initial stage of transition, because at later stage, private investors can easily come in and invest the transition process. But at initial stage, donors have to play an important role. Should limit support for non-renewable energy generation projects to achieve climate mitigation objectives in a timely manner. So we still find that donors are providing funding for non-renewable energy generation projects in developing countries. And donors need to carefully assess the usage of energy policy aid in the recipient countries, as it appears that domestic governments are using it to support fossil fuel based technologies, because policy aid is very difficult to monitor how effective it is utilized in developing countries. Moreover, donors should diversify their target from already developed hydro sources to non-hydro renewable sources. So these are the list of included countries in our regression models. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Panika, for the very elaborate presentation. It was a little too fast for me to pick up, but it doesn't matter. Those who are really in the modeling field would have picked it up. Of course, I picked up your specific conclusions and so on and so forth, which is much at a macro level. So with that, let me now invite our discussant, Dr. Abhijit Sen Gupta, the senior economist from AIIB from China, to discuss the paper. Thank you, Dr. Abhijit.
Am I audible?
Yes, very well.
And can you see my screen, if I may ask?
Yes.
Thank you. Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to discuss an interesting paper. Overall, I think the paper is well written and provides insight to a pertinent area, which is how to scale up renewables. As we know, there has been a growing list of countries as well as corporations who have undertaken the net zero pledge. But it's also well known at the same time that this transition would require several trillions of dollars. So funding from various sources would play a very important role. But it's not just funding, but that has to be complemented with transfer of knowledge and skills to ensure that this transition is smooth and fair and can be supported over time. So the just transition becomes very important. Coming specifically to this paper, as the author mentioned, this paper investigates the role of energy aid and its composition in renewable energy, substituting fossil fuel energy. But since the paper looks at the ratio of stock of renewable capacity to total energy capacity, it uses the GMM to account for persistence. And GMM then also allows them to account for endogeneity between aid and renewables, including the lagged effects. And then furthermore, to look at the differential effect across various stages of renewable capacity, the paper uses quantile regression. The main findings of the paper are that energy aid improves the share of renewable energy in overall energy capacity, but this is driven only through hydropower. And then second is that energy aid boosts renewables only when renewables already account for a higher than median share in overall energy. So based on this, they argue for a change in the composition of energy aid, focus on countries at an initial stage, reduce support to fossil fuel sector, and assess the usage of policy aid. So in my comments, I would like to just first place this paper in the current context of renewable financing, and then try and discuss some of the empirical results that are shown in the paper and maybe suggest some improvements which the authors may take to see if the results can improve. I mean, first of all, what is the role of aid which this paper focuses? I mean, aid, of course, plays a very important role for, let's say, the low-income countries, the small island developing countries. But just to put it in perspective, if you look at overall financing for renewables, and if we do this from a bottom-up approach, that is, we aggregate the project-level data, regardless of whether they're being financed by aid, whether they're financed by loan, whether they're being financed by government or private sector, focusing just on the private sector investment, including the PPPs, we find that over a period of time, the share of renewables in total energy investment has gone up over the last decade or so, which is an encouraging sign. And this is also the case for when we look at aid. But again, as we see that private sector investment significantly dwarfs the amount of global financial flows for energy. Secondly, when we break up this global public financial flows for renewable energy, what we find is aid, which I assume is like the concessional loan and grant element, has varied to reach a maximum of 1/3. And most of the aid continues to be most of the international public financial flow continues to be on standard, in the form of standard loans. And aid is about 1/3%. So overall, if you look at aid accounts for roughly about 10% of the finance that is going to renewable energy. Next, let me talk about the main variable of interest, which, as I mentioned, is the cumulative capacity, which is the authors choose to look at the share of renewable, hydropower, non-hydropower as a share of overall energy capacity. Now, given that this is a ratio of two stock variable, it is expected to be persistent. And as I mentioned before, the authors use system GMM to account for the lag-dependent variable. Now, and this is what we see in the chart. If you look at the chart on the left-hand side, cumulative renewable capacity, the share of hydropower, which is in blue, is pretty much fixed over the last 10 years or so. And whereas the share of wind and solar and other renewables have gone up. And this is largely because if you see on the chart on the right, what has been happening to the net additions, that net addition to hydropower has been relatively small, and much of the increase in renewable capacity has been driven by solar and wind. So basically, if we see how would aid influence this, aid would have an impact on the stock by influencing the net capacity additions, as would some of the other variables. So in addition to look at the stock, the authors may want to look at how new capacity additions react to some of the explanatory variables. Next, if I come to the key finding, which is that energy aid increases renewable energy capacity, but mainly through its impact on hydropower capacity. Now, while this is the finding, I mean, one can't automatically then ask that aid should, then hydropower is the way that one should go forward. And the authors make it clear that they also want aid to focus on some of the other aspects. But hydropower capacity additions tend to be problematic for a number of reasons. I mean, first, hydropower is spread sporadically across countries because it depends on geological resources. Second, even in countries which have these resources, there have been a sharp reduction in undeveloped economical sites. So this is evident from the small quantum of hydropower capacity addition during the last decade. And even if we see going forward, I mean, barring China, which is expected to add about 100 gigawatts, other countries' hydropower capacity addition is relatively small. And the third is something which is very important is that while hydropower is a greener form of energy, but there is rising awareness of social and environmental concerns that hydropower projects are associated with. Then let me come to some of the other empirical findings which may warrant additional research. So first is, what does this negative impact of energy aid on non-hydro renewables, which is solar and wind, imply? Because as I mentioned, a number of countries like the low-income countries or the island countries would be overwhelmingly dependent on aid to achieve their target. Then something which was surprising to me, why is aid focused on capacity development hampering renewable capacity? I mean, the authors mentioned that this is because one can't monitor how the policy aid is going, or it is going in some other direction. But ideally, it would be good if there is some evidence to back this up. There are counterintuitive signs on some of the other sectors like private sector credit, because as I mentioned, that private sector has been one of the drivers of renewable energy investments across many countries. Then I would like to focus on three variables, two which are not included and one which is included, to show how the estimation can be improved. I mean, one is aid is often driven by bilateral relations between countries. And so some dummy might be included to control this to avoid any bias. And second, something which the paper can also see is what makes renewable attractive, I mean, on the demand side. Why are countries going for renewable aid, and why is this becoming an attractive option? And this is partly because the cost of electricity that can be produced using renewables has sharply fallen over a period of time. So much so that for a number of countries, for a number of technologies like solar PV or wind, they are now lower than fossil fuel. So, I mean, include the cost of electricity or the relative cost of electricity, again, to avoid any omitted variable bias. And lastly, I mean, something which was interesting, the authors find that countries at the initial level of transition require most support from the donor agencies. But again, this is countered with that aid does not play a catalyst role in these economies. And one that the initial stage of transition don't have the required institutions to do this, to absorb and to direct aid into renewable capacity additions. So the author control for the institutions by looking at quality, which is like democracy versus non-democracy. But my sense is that probably they need to get something more deeper, which is directly associated with renewable energy. I mean, here are some examples which has been shown in the research. For example, it has been found that state capacity has a strong relationship with renewables. I mean, countries where higher share of respondents express confidence in government tend to be willing to pay higher taxes to prevent environmental pollution. So what is the state capacity in developing renewables? Similarly, how open is the market? Because in countries where electricity tariff is set by state authorities, instead of more efficient producers are linked to lower private sector participation in renewable energy generation projects. And lastly, we know that contract management environment is important for renewables because they tend to be affected by a number of things, whether it's delayed tendering schemes, renegotiation of power purchase agreements, land acquisitions, etc. So I would urge the author to look into some institutions or institutional capacity variables that are more directly associated with renewable energy development. So again, thank you to the organizers and the authors for inviting me to discuss this paper. Overall, it was a very interesting experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Abhijit. Panika, probably you can overall, give a response to it. I'm sure you cannot go into individual details.
Yes.
You can address
Yes.
them in the paper. Before I quickly move into a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Yes.
Thank you, sir, for the valuable suggestions for improving the paper. First of all, I directly come to why I have used the policy variable in the paper, because in my case, there's a lot of the data availability problem is the issue, like in the terms of the kind of regulatory institutions in developing countries or the state capacity. I can't, according to me, I am not able to find the data based on all the countries which I have included in my model. If I take the specific developing countries, probably I can incorporate your suggestion of specific institutions related to the renewable sector. And yes, this
Panika,
is
please go ahead.
Yeah. Based on the second aspect is that, you are right that certain aspects are counterproductive, like financial development, private investments in developing countries might be. I have read the literature that it has a positive impact on the renewable transition. But in my case, I'm not renewable growth. There is a positive impact, but in my case, there is a the variable is renewable transition, where I'm using the ratio. So probably a financial development might also support fossil fuel technologies simultaneously. So the impact might be less, as indicated by my study. And other aspects I'll try to incorporate in my study, possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Panika. From my side, let me give, I don't know whether there are questions or comments, probably something what you can think of. One thing, when it comes to development aid, as you know, they have different levels of aid. For instance, we have grants, we have concessionary financing, we have market-based financing, ordinary capital resources.
Yes.
So you may have to differentiate them because some may, catalyze certain things. Some others, of course, basically come as part of the rest of financing in a project. It's quite interesting, as Abhijit was mentioning, that how important it is to support the countries at initial stages of transition. But at the same time, being a development financier, I will tell you, sometimes in terms of volumes, probably putting in some commercial level financing and private sector window to countries like India, for instance, which where it has improved quite a lot and way beyond the initial stages, gives you volumes in terms of transition financing in the renewable energy sector. So if you look at the absolute volumes, probably you get volumes in those countries rather than those at the initial stages. That's what I have experienced in terms of volumes. And so therefore, you may like to have a distinction between different types of aid. For instance, concessionary financing and grant financing may have a very good impact in the countries where the transition is at the initial stage, whereas the commercial level financing might help in other countries much more to get the volumes. And also the fact that these development financing institutions have also a private sector window. And again, kind of concessionary in a way in terms of maybe tenor and so on, but not really concessionary in terms of overall, the financing, conditions. The other is that this Abhijit again mentioned this policy support. In fact, we have to be very careful what type of policy support we are looking at it here. Some of the policy support may be specifically for the renewable energy sector, then definitely it's going to help, right? And other policies, particularly when it comes to places like ADB, we have dedicated policy-based loans. That means the disbursements is based on specific policy conditions. So the policy conditions themselves are usually attached to renewable energy, energy access, and so on. So naturally, such policy loans help rather than discourage renewable energy sector. So those are a few comments I have from my side. You may like to go into details in your analysis when improving the paper.
So I have to just mention that I have taken the policy support in the energy sector. It's like donors are not segregating it, whether it is related to renewable or non-renewable. So that might I get a negative impact on the transition process. Probably it might happen that recipients are using it for the fossil fuels or donors are providing for supporting this. So it's because I'm not taking specific donors, like maybe multilateral or bilateral, I have aggregated it. So in my future research agenda, I have to see whether bilateral donors are more impactful in the transition or multilateral donors are more impactful, because there may be different motives for giving aid for bilateral and multilateral agencies.
I agree. Probably what you can do is actually looking at the results, knowing that might have some implications. You can go back to our inputs and to see how you can refine the inputs to support at the end the outcomes. Yes, so there is a question coming from a gentleman, and that's lack of electricity infrastructure for supply of RE from I hope it's a renewable energy, not rural electrification, from one state to another, like in Uttar Pradesh and Gujarat, has developed solar fields. But this does not reach to Maharashtra due to lack of electricity infrastructure. One of such projects was initiated in Maharashtra, but lack of support from local government and people. Yeah. And people, the project delayed by more than 7 years. So it's more of a comment rather than a question. Continue. It was being done under a PPP model. Okay, it's basically a comment, I suppose. I'm sure you have access to these questions and answers, and which you can take a closer look at and see how you can bring it into your paper to improve.
Yes, sir.
It seems that no other questions. So if there are no other questions coming through, let me now close the session. And before closing, let me thank all the presenters and the discussants for very excellent presentations and insightful comments and responses coming from the presenters and obviously the discussants. Thank you very much, and hope all those who enjoy this session, and the papers can be improved in line with those comments. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear presenters and Priyanta. Excellent moderation as usual. And thank you for supporting our nearly every event you support. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very nice joining. Thank you.
Let's finish this day, day one of the 3-day event. Dear audience, please join us tomorrow. Agenda you can see in the chat, link to agenda. And please join us tomorrow. I think it's around 9:30 Tokyo time. We'll have morning and afternoon session.